be online with you. This is the first time I've presented using Zoom, so I'm navigating a couple things that I haven't done before, so patience with me. It's a pretty easy system, but there's a couple things that I'm not quite sure if I'm doing correctly, so bear with me as I go through learning with you today. Let's see. Maybe I always like to engage you a little bit right away from the beginning. In the chat function, would you just write in where you're currently located? So like city and state, let me know where you're coming from today. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing that with me. Oh, that's great. Fun, I love this. Awesome, okay, some of you close by, and some of you on the East Coast, and some of you in the South, some in other places, Midwest. I see the Pequot Lakes person. Let's see, where are you? Kayla. I grew up in Nisswa, so not very far from you. I often say Brainerd unless someone knows the region, and then I actually say Nisswa because you'll know where that is. That's great. Okay. Well, it's a beautiful day in Duluth today, but probably not as beautiful in every part of the country as we know, and I hope you're all safe where you're located. Our goal today is to give you information on resume writing, and I'm going to make an assumption that some of you have done a lot of work with resumes in the past. You might have been someone who's written and updated your resume regularly. You might be someone who's reviewed resumes a lot because you're a hiring manager, and in that case, you can also share some tips and feedback from your perspective as from someone reading resumes. I will, in a minute, just share my screen and I'll go through my presentation. I think what I'll do is I'll present for a while and then I'll take a break and see if you have questions, and you can just be adding your questions onto the chat function. So I'll present for 5-10 minutes, we'll break and see if you have questions, and I'll resume the presentation. I also know that a number of you sent in your resumes ahead of time. What we found a number of years ago is that it's helpful to hear the content and tips from us in terms of suggestions of how to develop an effective resume. But it's also helpful as soon as you hear to start applying it. And a great way to do that is to look at one another's resumes and give one another feedback, and you can start seeing the ideas put into action right away. So with that, let's see, I will leave me up, although yeah, okay, I think the lighting's okay. I will get started. I'm going to share my screen and let's get going on the presentation. All right. So we'll get started here. One thing I want you to know is in Career Services, we're here to assist students no matter what site, no matter what delivery method. So after today, if you have questions, you can always email me with follow-up. You might have specific situations that you want to talk through. So no, you can do that. I will be passing on some of our contact information during the presentation, but Katie can also share that with you as well. So we're going to talk about resume writing primarily, a little bit of time on cover letters because I want you to have that information too. And then that small period of time on the group critique at the end. Just so you know, the other folks in our office, so I'm on the far left there, Carrie Taylor Kemp works with employer relations, building relationships with employers who might be interested in hiring our students for internships or full-time jobs. Andrea Chartier, if you send resumes in, she's someone who might be critiquing them as well as me. She's our career counselor, and Diane Swinoski. So our contact information here, I should mention, so you can record this, but I also will be sharing the PowerPoint at the end so that you'll have all these resources when you need them. Okay, when we talk about documents that you need for the application process, I like to talk about that as sharing your story. Sometimes when we get into the application, people are anxious, and for good reason. You're applying for jobs. But in the end, it's really you and your way to effectively learn how to tell your story. So if we think about that through resumes and cover letters, that's your written version of your story. So the resume will be that summary of your experiences, what you did, what you accomplished, your education. Cover letter is telling the employer why you're interested in this particular role, this particular organization, why you're a good fit with them. You're also going to be telling your story through interviews, and we'll do a presentation for you, not today, but in the future, to give you tips and ideas about preparing for interviews. And interestingly, the reality is social media is another way that you are telling your story. So very different from when I started in this field. The reality is many employers do Google their candidates prior to their application. And this can be a really strong benefit for you. If you have a strong presence, you're active, you're connected with folks in your field, you're following professional organizations, that's all great. But it is also a reminder that people are Googling you. And sometimes people argue whether they agree with that or not, but the reality that it is happening. So I want you to be aware of it and be thoughtful about what you have out there on social media. And I would encourage you to Google yourself to see what comes up and make sure you're happy with what comes up when you do that. So ultimately, before any good writing, the first thing you want to do is say, why am I doing this? So the purpose of a resume really is to summarize your experiences, your education, your accomplishments, and your skills. Keyword there is summarize. It doesn't need to be a list of everything you've ever done. The resume, you get to pick and choose the pieces that are most relevant for the position that you're applying for at that time. And it's to persuade the employer to get you to the next step, to get to the interview, to move forward in the process. When we ask employers what they're looking for most, I want to start right off with that because ultimately I'm giving you feedback based on what I hear from employers. So what I hear is typically succinct. They don't want to read pages and pages of resume material. And for most new grads, that would be 1 page. In your field in healthcare, employers would look at 2 pages as long as you had enough to justify going to 2 pages, meaning don't add a bunch of stuff just because you think it's going to make you look more impressive. So page to 2 pages, depending on your work experience. A caveat to that is if you change field at some point and you're applying for positions that are more in the business field and less in the healthcare, they are more inclined to want just a 1-page resume. Generally, bullets over paragraphs, and that's because we know employers are scanning through really quickly. So most employers will say first glance, 15, 20, maybe 30 seconds. And pretty quickly they start to divide what they're looking at into the yes, I'm interested, and into the, no, I'm not interested. So for that reason, I think bullets are much more effective than a paragraph format. So that would be the suggestion. Of course, it's a sample of your writing, so no errors, no mistakes. You need to check again and have several other people look at it as well. Tailored to meet the job. One thing that's really helpful for you is if you have a job you're applying for, is to take that position description and set it right next to your resume and go back and forth. Circle things on the resume. What skills do you see that they're looking for? What do they highlight? And then look at your resume. Have you demonstrated that you have those skills and experiences? Many times you do have them, you just haven't written about them in your resume. So if you see that the employer on their job description 3 times mentions that you must be collaborative, be part of a team, and be able to work well with others. Well, maybe those are all true for you, but you didn't highlight that specifically in your resume. I would go back and tweak and add some language to make sure that you have addressed that. Email and contact information, just like we said, folks are Googling you. Employers are making decisions pretty quickly on whether they want to hire you. So if your contact information isn't professional, it can be a red flag. So your CSS email is good for a lifetime. So you're welcome to use that. If you want to use a personal email, that's fine too. Just make sure you're using something professional. So, I might have Mary Anderson at yahoo.com. I wouldn't want partygirl22 at yahoo.com, right? Time to move away from those emails into something more professional. Same with your voice mail on your cell phone or whatever phone system you're using. If I called you and you weren't there, you want to make sure I'm receiving a professional outgoing message. Okay. Skill focus, not task focus. We're going to talk about this in more detail coming up. The idea is that you're moving away from giving a list of your job description on your resume, and instead you're focusing on the skills you used and what you accomplished. So keep that in mind. We'll talk about it more in a minute. This was from Shannon, one of our alums, Shannon Rothy. She works at St. Luke's Hospital, and I just asked her to give me a snapshot of what she is looking for most in application materials, and this is what she shared. Okay. Here's the reality. If you ask 5 different people their opinion on resumes, you will get 5 slightly different opinions. So sometimes if you ask me a question, my answer might be, it depends. And it will depend on the industry. It will depend on your background. It'll depend on how you choose to organize your material. So I know that's a little frustrating. On the other side of that, it can be allow you more freedom. It means each one of you, your resume might look a little bit different, and it should. You have different experiences, different things you're applying for. In the end, you have to be able to answer yes to those 4 questions. It has to be easy to read. Someone scan through it 20, 30, 40 seconds so you get a glance at who you are. It has to be informative and descriptive, moving beyond just tasks. No mistakes, has to be error-free, and it all has to be honest and truthful, which of course probably seems obvious, but there are people who try to embellish on their resume, and if you're caught doing that, it's grounds for terminating employment. So you want to make sure everything's honest and truthful. This is just, there's so many funny cartoons and examples out there, so I always like to throw a few in. So ways that you might miss something if you're just spell checking and not having a second or third reader look through it. So it says here you're a professional booger, and he says blogger is what he meant to type. Okay. Hang on, I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to go into all the details, but I'm just going to pause for a second. Any questions up until this point? No. While I pause here, I'm going to ask you one other question because I'm on the chat function right now. How many of you have been on the other side of the table, meaning you are someone who has reviewed resumes for applications that you've hired for? And while you're doing that, I see someone ask about longer than 1 page. Yeah, you can go to 2 pages. Again, what I would say is if you go to 2 pages, you need at least a third a page of content on the second page to justify going to 2 pages. And in healthcare, they're just more willing to look at 2 pages versus traditional business. Yeah, okay, some of you have reviewed many, some of you have done some of you haven't before. Okay, it's great. I think what happens is when you've looked at it, you start to know what the reader's looking for, so that's helpful. Okay, some of you will be doing this in the future. It's interesting. So I do this for a living, right? This is what I coach students on all the time, but I'm on a search committee at the college right now. And it always reminds me, it's very helpful for me to do that sometimes because I switch roles again and I'm looking through the eyes of an employer and someone hiring. It's not in my own department, it's another department, but it helps me to stay fresh and what is really helpful from the employer's point of view. Okay, looks like no other questions. So I will keep going and I'll jump back in a second again. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the format first, which is in some ways the easiest part, but really important. And it's important because there's something about it, if a resume is clean and crisp and well organized, again, it helps the reader go through it. It sort of has this professional feel about it when the person receiving it looks at it. So here's the things I want you to be aware of. Margins, generally, most people say 1-inch margins for a document. On a resume, you actually can creep up to a 1/2-inch margin on the top. And the reason it can be a little bit smaller is you have a name letterhead running across the top of your resume. So that means if you need the space, you can reduce that to a 1/2 inch. Left, right, if you need, maybe you're like 3 lines on page 2 and you're trying to get back on page 1. Left, right can be reduced to about 0.8 or 0.9. If it's much smaller than that, I think it's makes it hard to read. Wizards, templates, these can be really helpful because you go in and you plug the information and they make it look pretty. The technology makes it look pretty. But in the end, I would encourage you not to use them for two reasons. The biggest reason is that they will become frustrating for you. You'll want to change maybe a format or a font or a margin, and the wizard won't let you do that. And the second is they start to all look the same. You can tell ones that have come through a wizard system because you start, someone who looks at lots of resumes, you start to recognize the templates or wizards. So just start with a standard Word document and manage your own formatting changes on the resume. Within there, you're going to have headers like education, relevant experience, technology skills, and you'll be listing things most recent to least recent. So those are the basic things I want you to be aware of in terms of your layout. The style, I do encourage students to use some stylized font, meaning you can use some bold, some italics, you might use underlining. Just don't do it so much that it gets crazy busy. Instead, you're using it to guide the reader through. So you might always bold the place and italicize your job title or reverse, and then you have bullets underneath. So just be consistent all the way through. You can choose lots of different headers, and you actually want to be thoughtful about what your headers are so that it really matches the information that's underneath. So some of you might have a header just called education. Some of you might have a header called education and certifications because you want to list both of those. Some of you might have a header that is healthcare experience, and you're going to group all your healthcare experiences together. And then another header called supporting experiences. And maybe those are management experiences, which are really relevant, but they weren't in healthcare. So you want to think through what is the most logical way to group your work experiences. And not just your work, actually work and paid and unpaid experiences. I already said this one more time. Check, check again, no mistakes. Okay, the content. So again, we'll start with the easiest to move through. Your name should be the largest thing on the document. So usually I would say that your name would be 18, 20, 22 font size. I would list your contact information, meaning phone number and an email. You can also list your mailing address. If you sometime in the future choose to post your resume on a public site, I usually take off the mailing address. So protect your privacy a bit. But if you're submitting it to a specific company, a specific position, then it's okay to leave your mailing address on. If you are actively using LinkedIn, which I think is a fantastic tool for networking, following organizations, connecting with professional organizations looking for jobs, you can list your LinkedIn URL at the top along with your contact information. On LinkedIn, there's a way to shorten that URL. I think we'll talk about that more in the spring, but if you're interested now, send me an email and I can help you do that. We talked about the other two pieces already. Education would be the next section. And I think almost everybody who sent their resume to me did not actually have education next. And I'm going to make a case that I think that should be the top thing on your resume. And I'll tell you the two ways to think of it. Sometimes people feel like as they gain more experience, their education might move to the bottom. Right now, the reason that I'm guessing for some of you, the reason that you might be applying for new jobs or that you will be qualified for different jobs is based on your education, and or you'll be applying for jobs that require your education. So if that's the case, I want you to get it up to the top. So right away they can say, yep, meets the education requirements for this position. And so that would be my argument. That being said, there's cases where people will move it later, especially as you move through your career path. You might put experience first and education second. Under education, you only need to list places that you're pursuing a degree or received a degree in the past. So let's say you took 2 courses at a community college and you're using that towards your current degree. No need to list that on your resume, only the places where you are currently pursuing or you already received a degree. I would list your GPA if it's above a 3.0. It can be a selling point. List things like minors, if you have extra certifications, if you studied abroad. All of those things, they're selling points for you. If you're ever on a dean's list or you're in the honors program, each and every one of those is a selling point for you. So all of that would be under your education. If you'd used a broader title like maybe education and certifications, then you might put some other things under there as well. You might have some real specific certifications that would make sense to list right up front on the resume. Okay, I'm going to break again because I want to see if you have questions about education, and we'll continue on with experiences. Yeah, so I think Ashley was asking, do we help students find jobs? So what we do is help you with the process of finding a job. So yes, help you with providing feedback on your resume and cover letter. If you ever needed help with interviewing skills, and then we try to be part of sites and organizations that might post positions for students that are in particular majors. So I think maybe even in the spring, that's something we'll want to talk about. Again, we help students now when you're a student, we help you when you're close to graduation, and we also help you once you've graduated as an alum if you need help in the future. So if that's something you need right now, a little assistance looking for positions, you could email me and we'd brainstorm what you're looking for. Yeah, if you're currently in a program, usually I would list what the intended graduation date is. So if you had, Central Lakes Community College and you actually received your degree in 2016, you'd write that. Versus at the College of St. Scholastica, I'd probably put May 2018, if that's your anticipated grad date. And they'll understand if it's listed then, that's when you're planning to graduate. Right. Yeah, you don't want to suggest you have the degree. Some people would say expected or anticipated grad date, May 2018, just so it's really clear that you don't have the degree yet. Yeah, let's see. Do you list the dates always for the degrees and certifications? The only time I've had someone take the date off of a degree is if they wanted to not share their age on a resume, if there's some concern about sharing age. So if I had someone who completed their undergraduate degree, I don't even know what the cutoff would be, in the 70s, they're looking for a job and they don't want to run the risk of any age discrimination, they might take the date off of their undergraduate degree. Again, if that seems like something that applies to you, we can talk through pros and cons and what that might look like. Certifications, I think it's only important. I had a student in who had a certification that was no longer active, so she had both CNA and CPR, but neither of them were active anymore. I actually had her take them off her resume because if they weren't active, I didn't want them on there. Other than that, certifications, you could, but I don't think you have to list the date necessarily. Okay, so Julie's asking, I have several different degrees. Do I list them all? I would list the ones that are relevant to what you're applying for, but you don't have to list them all. I mean, that's the beauty of a resume. In an application, you might have to list all of your education, just like you list many more jobs. Resume, you get to pick and choose which education. So my guess is yours are relevant, and so that you might include them on the resume. Again, it depends a little bit what you're applying for in the future. Okay, I think I covered so far. So I'm going to go on to the next section and we'll break again. So keep them coming if you have more questions. Okay, so the next section generally is experiences. Keep in mind, I'll go back to objective and summary at the end. So that might come before this. So generally after education is experiences. If you get rid of the word work and you say like relevant experiences, healthcare experiences, it can include both paid and unpaid experiences. Once you add the word work in there, then the assumption it was a paid experience. I already talked about the first couple of those. So let's go back to the idea that you're writing descriptions about what you've done in these positions. The key is to really focus on the transferable skills that are relevant for the job you're applying for, and not just your task, but what you accomplished, what you did well. So when you do that, we want you to start with action verbs. So you don't need to start with sentences like, I was responsible for. You skip all of that and jump right into the action verb. So managed a staff of 15, including hiring, retaining, and delegating of workload, something like that. So you start right with the action verb. If it's a job you're currently in, usually you use present tense of the verb. If it's a job you're in the past, it would be past tense of that verb. Okay, achievements, we talked about that. Often in your field, I would suggest that you do split your experiences, and again, it will depend on your experiences. I want all the things that are most relevant up front or at the top of your resume. So that's why you might divide it and have relevant and supporting, healthcare experiences, other experiences. Then within that category, you're listing most recent to least recent. You might have some other areas, though, where you have also gained great skills and experiences. So they were off, maybe it was a volunteer position. You might have a whole nother category called community involvement or professional involvement. Anything where you have taken a leadership role is great. Anytime you've made an improvement, you've been recognized for something, all of those help the reader know a little bit more about you. As you go through, the interesting thing that shifts from when you're applying for entry-level jobs to when you're moving up and applying for more advanced positions is that your resume has to have more and more focus. So you really want to think about targeting your resume for that specific job. And that it's compelling, that you can show that you have the skills, the experiences, the ability to be specifically successful in that organization. So when you start to think about your bulleted descriptions under each job, there is even some logic to putting the most important relevant bullets first, and then you get to other things that are good, but maybe not quite as relevant later in your list of bulleted descriptions. You definitely want to think, and this is why one of my suggestions is to always have someone in your field review your resume, because there are things that are very field specific. So you'd want someone in healthcare, health information management, faculty member to review and say, oh, here's a better way to say this. Or I think you really need to highlight your technical skills and you haven't showcased that in your resume. Okay, so I talked about this, pulling that out. You want to think about those unique experiences, work with diverse patients, your collaboration, times when you've trained people, special projects, technical systems that you've worked with. The other related experiences, sometimes you don't even write bullets for these. Sometimes you just want to show that you've had some other jobs, but you don't need to even put bullets with them. Or you do want a few bullets, but they're going to be less. The jobs that are most related, I would say up to 6 bullets is about right. If you get more than that, again, I think the reader stops reading. So for the most relevant, up to 6 bullets. The less related areas, no bullets, or maybe 1 to 2 bullets for those areas. So when we're talking about transferable skills, in addition to wanting to know what you did in your job, right? What were you responsible for? What was the scope? You're trying to also highlight all these transferable skills. Almost no matter what the profession is, the number 1 or number 2 skill that employers say they are looking for is communication skills. And so I think part of that is an employer doesn't want to train you on how to communicate. They expect that you come in with that. And so if there are ways that you can show or demonstrate your ability to successfully communicate with your peers, with your clients, in difficult situations, in person, on the phone, in writing, that will be really helpful. The other area that employers talk about is this collaboration, working well with others. So again, they don't want to help you to play well with others once you're hired. They're going to have an assumption that you already can do that. So these are just a few examples of transferable skills to think about, and how could you incorporate that into your resume. We also talked about starting with these action verbs. And I'll be giving you, and maybe Katie already has, a link to our job search handbook. In our handbook, we have a list of all kinds of action verbs that will be helpful for you to think about how you can use that to start your bulleted descriptions. And what happens for most of us is we get stuck on a couple. It's like I assisted, I guided, and I helped, and I can't think of one other action verb. So this helps you to have some variety when you're writing your bulleted descriptions. Okay, tailored to the job. Again, look at that description. Okay, so I want to give you a couple easy examples. So generally, starting with that action verb, you can have periods at the end of the sentences, or you don't. Just be consistent all the way through on your document. So do or do not have periods, just be consistent all the way through. So these two are fine. This was someone who's at a call center, and these are just fine. However, if you can add in some numbers and quantify, and you don't need to do this for every bullet, but if you can do it for some, all of a sudden you have much more context. It helps a person to understand the scope of what you've done. Sometimes if you add in adverbs, add adjectives, the results of your behavior, what happened because you did this well. So maybe you improved efficiency in some system, which resulted in what? Some, probably quantify how it's improved the system. So you can see pretty easily, just adding a little more depth, you get a much better sense of what this person's done. Okay, let me go back to this objectives and summaries. So it used to be at the top of resumes, we always had job candidates put in an objective, and that would be a line like seeking HIM manager position at Essentia Health. Now what we hear, because most applications are online and you've just submitted, you just have connected your application to a position, you probably don't need to say that. They already know what you're applying for. That being said, if you're using this at a networking event, or your cousin is passing it on to someone they work with, then you'd want to add that back in again. Summaries would be sort of summary of skills and experiences, which I do think for some of you, you have enough experience that you could justify doing this. Some of the students I work with that came right from high school to undergrad, they might not have enough experience yet to summarize. Some of you do. The key is in that summary, you can't have generic statements because the employer tends to scan through it. And that's often what people start with. They will have statements like strong communicator, problem solver, strong work history. And those are too generic. And in fact, they can see most of that by reading your descriptions below. So if you're going to use a summary, I want you to be more concrete, like 10 years of proven supervision experiences, 12 years working in healthcare setting, managed teams between 7 and 25 members. So if you can be concrete and specific, things that not everybody else could say, then it's effective. And at the same time, you don't want to just repeat what they can read below. So if you can pick and sort of choose a few things and summarize to show, here's why I'm a strong candidate for the position, then it works. Now, some of you will also have other things you want to highlight. Maybe you've been really involved in your professional organization, you volunteer, extracurricular kind of things. You don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but it does make you well-rounded if you include it on the resume. So it's like, wow, in addition to education and strong work experience, this person, is involved with his or her community in some way. So that's why you might include that. Sometimes we will also encourage students to have a section called skills or technical skills, computer skills, and in your field that's not unusual for someone to actually have a section just dedicated to that, where you could describe the different electronic medical systems you've used, different coding systems you've used, maybe you know some programming. So I would definitely highlight that. Sometimes you're so in that world, you forget those are skills that are really desired, so we want to make sure to highlight them. In addition, if you have additional training, workshops, second language skills, I would also include those. References, no need to list this on your resume. So this is really a separate standalone document where you would have your same name and contact information at the top. And of course, you want to ask the person ahead of time, would they be willing to be your reference? And then generally you would have 3 to 5 references based on what they're requesting, generally not your family, usually people who supervised you, advised you, or taught you. So a separate standalone document that probably has your same name letterhead on the top of it. Okay, this is just a quick example that I drew to give you a sense of what it would look like. So, generally you're listing the name of the organization, the city and state, your job title, the years you've been there, maybe month and years, but you usually don't need the date. So you don't need to say like August 16th, 2016, just August 2016 to present will work. And you can see each one of these started with an action verb. They're all present tense. They have a period at the end. And so just, there's no one right way to write these bullets, but I wanted to give you a sample of what I was describing. I'm going to do these quick tips and then I'll break again. So 1 to 2 pages. If you do print out in the future, you're using it at a networking event or a job fair, I would try to print it on quality paper like resume bond paper, which you can usually get at Office Max or Target, places like that. If you do print it out, neutral colored paper. Minimize how often you're using abbreviations. Unless it's widely known in your field, you generally don't want too many abbreviations on your resume. And I think the rest of this we've covered, so just quick tips there. What not to do. In the US, if you're applying, you don't include your height, weight, age, or picture on your resume. But if you apply and you're going abroad somewhere, every country has slightly different formats, so we'd want to investigate that. Often I don't include hobbies and social interests. Employers say they're really not as, unless it's just a brief summary of some community involvement. I would be careful and stay away from sensitive areas, which tend to be religion and politics. Maybe you've taught Sunday school for 15 years. You could list that. I just might not list the denomination on your resume. Employers technically can't make a decision on you based on that kind of information, but I'm always aware that it might bias someone's decision. You don't need any I statements at all. You don't need those phrases like responsible for, duties included. And again, everything has to be honest. Here for your entertainment while you're thinking of more questions you have. It's so easy to do these. You know what you're trying to say. Spell check might not catch it. This is, again, why it's important to have other people look at it. So just a little humor for your afternoon. Okay, so I'm going to break here. Other questions, go ahead. Okay, Melissa, that's great. Someone had asked about putting the date on there for credentials and certifications. That's really helpful. So from your opinion in your field, when you look, you do want to see that date. So that's great. I think that's helpful for me to know too. Anything else? Before I go on to the cover letters, I do have another question. So if you are someone who's done some hiring, it would be great if you had like one tip or the thing that is a red flag for you, because I think, again, we always all learn from each other. So if you have anything you want to share, that'd be great. The question was if you had something that was relevant, but it was several years ago. So that's a great question. If I'm working with someone who went right from undergrad, right from high school to undergrad, we usually say just your college experiences. Beyond that, for folks who've been working in the field and then applying for jobs, the rule of thumb is about 10 years. And the idea is that if it gets too old, you no longer are using those skills anyway. But there's always exceptions to that. Sometimes things are so relevant in the past that you want to include them, or you want to show that you moved from one position to the next over the last 15 years. I would just say the ones that are further back, usually less and less bulleted descriptions for them. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Melissa says grammar, spelling errors for sure. Oh, okay. Shavonda, I have two answers to this, and I'll see which your question is. So if you've been a coder, like almost the same position at 3 different organizations, sometimes it seems really repetitive to try to write a description for a coder, or any job for that matter, 3 different times. So if that's the case, sometimes I will have a person list the organization and the dates, 1, 2, 3, and then underneath of it you have shared bullets. So you're really only writing the bullets for coder once, and it's being shared between those 3 positions. So, whatever coder your title, St. Luke's Hospital, the dates, coder, St. Joseph's Hospital, whatever the dates, whatever it is. So you list them, boom, 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 and then underneath they have shared bullets. I'm not sure if that's your question, but it's a good question to think about. If you've had progressive positions within an organization, that's different. So then you might put Essentia Health, and then the location. You would have your first position or your most recent position in bullets, the position before that bullets. You don't need to keep repeating the name of the organization over and over again. Okay. If that's not your question, feel free to type in and clarify. Yeah, right. Attention to detail is always important, but I think in your field, you're often being judged by accuracy and efficiency, so it's even more important in some fields than others. Okay, Kayla, good question. So restaurant 7 years, and then healthcare, but I've only had one position. So I would probably include the restaurant work, but it's up to you. I think what happens if you have restaurant work or any service work, and you haven't had a whole bunch of other healthcare experience, it still shows some of the skills that folks are interested in, right? So it shows problem solving, working under pressure, communicating, working with difficult people. So again, probably maybe less bullets under the restaurant work than the healthcare area, but I do think it shows a nice set of skills that complement what you've been doing recently. And again, it kind of depends. So once you put it all together, if it feels odd or you don't have the space, you could take it out. But I think there is some benefit for it. Yeah. So Julie, thank you. Your red flag about boasting too much or too little. So the application is a time for you to sell yourself and your accomplishments, but there's this fine line between selling yourself and also becoming overconfident. And so that's when it's helpful to have some other folks read it to give you feedback. Does this sound confident but not too boastful? It's a fine line, and I agree. I can read things and sometimes go, "Oops, too much," and other times it's like, "That's great. That's an appropriate amount of sharing your skills." Okay. This is great. I'm going to talk about the cover letter, and I actually am not going to use my PowerPoint. I'm just going to have a conversation with you about it. Cover letters definitely have to be tailored for every position, even more so than the resume. And so the mistakes we hear from employers is that people forget to change those things. They forget to update it. So you're saying, "Dear St. Luke's Hospital," and you've just submitted this cover letter to Essentia Hospital, right? So we don't want that to happen. You do want a paragraph in there or several sentences about why you're specifically interested in that organization. So I said I was just on a search committee, and it became just so apparent to me again. In addition to wanting to know the person is qualified for the job I'm looking at right now, I want to know they want to work here, and they know something about St. Scholastica, and they know something about the position. So if you think about, here's the position description, and if you can see my hands, here's the position description, and here's who you are. The cover letter is really your link between these two. to say, I have these great experiences, I'm passionate about what you do, I believe in your mission, I know your reputation, I want to be part of your organization. So I know that's challenging when you're applying to multiple positions, but it is crucial that you do tailor it for each of those positions. Generally, a cover letter would be about 3 to 4 paragraphs, 10 to 12 sentences. You can use your same name letterhead up the top, just like you did on your resume, so you can repeat that again. Um, what else do I want you to know? If you can find the name of a specific person when you apply, it's great. So it could be Dear Miss Anderson or Dear Mary Anderson. You can't always do that, so sometimes it's hiring manager or recruiter or something like that. It is nice at the end to thank them for their time and that you look forward to hearing from them. Um, I think those are things I can think of right off. Um, a couple other notes that have come up that I do want to address. Yeah, if your work history is complicated, then we might have a private conversation about what that looks like. Because if you've only been a job for a few months and you've changed and you have 7 jobs at 3 months each, that's probably, a little exaggeration, but it would be a red flag to folks. What's happening? Why isn't she staying? So we'd want to talk about why that was happening, then how we describe it in the resume. Okay, Melissa, so your next question or your next statement is perfect because I want to talk about this. For every single thing that you put on your resume, you want to be prepared for the interviewer to ask you about it. So you need to have either story or proof to go along with it during the interview. So that could be as simple as you have on there, that you resolved customer complaints. You should be expecting or ready for me to say, tell me a little bit, or tell me about a time when you had a customer that was very upset and that you had to resolve this concern. How did you do it? What did it look like? So you have to have that story ready. The technical skills are similar. So if you want to be very honest about the level skill you have, so sometimes people even say proficient, basic knowledge, entry-level experience with, so that if I said, you mentioned you had Java programming, would you be able to jump in and start doing that right away for us? Well, if not, you probably wanted to just put basic Java programming. So yeah, everything you have on there, be ready for the employer to ask you questions about it. Okay, Leah. I love it. 6 jobs under 14 months. And again, maybe there was a reason. Maybe someone, had temp jobs. We don't know. But if you don't put it together or explain it in a cover letter, that's going to be concerning. Yeah. Newest positions to oldest. It's reverse chronological. That's great. Oh, so you're not Kayla, you're not the one changing organizations. I think I would put PCA as your job title, and then maybe you'd list the three companies. And in one of your bullets, I think you could put served, consistently served individual, and maybe describe that um, through three different um, three different agencies or something like that, 2 different agencies. I can work with you a little bit on that, but I think you could have a bulleted description saying you served one individual who was utilizing 3 different agencies over the course of 2 years or whatever it was. Okay. Okay, one other question here, and then I'll show a couple resumes. So Kayla says, if you don't include a job, then if it creates a big gap in work history, a couple different things to think about. On your application, you've probably listed all your jobs, so it might be okay. But you're right. If it leaves a big gap in your work history, I might include it under a different section just called Other Experiences with no bullets, but simply to show you've been consistently or pretty consistently employed so you don't end up with a big gap in your work history. Um, people expect that people, for whatever reason, someone might take time out to care for children or for a parent. I mean, sometimes there's reasons for a gap, but if you actually were working, it might be nice to include that job under supporting your experience or other experiences. Okay, great. Great questions. It makes it much more interesting because it becomes real when we start talking about what about this and how does this work. So I love that. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to pull up, I think 3 of you submitted resumes. Thank you for that, or maybe more of you, but we took the first 3. I don't know if we'll get through all of them or not. We'll see what the time looks like. I'm going to pull up a resume without my comments written on it, just for you to look at. And based on what you know, and based on our conversation today, have you just jot down a few things you think of that you might suggest making changes for this person. And we'll do it in a very respectful and kind way as we give one another feedback. But it is helpful when you start to look at it that way. So let me pull the first one up here. Hang on. Oh, I don't want that one. Hang on. All right. So we have Ashley. And I will just sort of scroll through it briefly, and then we'll together look at the questions here.
Mary,
Yeah.
we can't see the resume.
You can't. Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hang on. Let's see if I can move it over.
We just see a picture of you guys at the picnic.
Oh, that's nice of us. Well, at least it's a good picture on my desktop. Huh. I think it's because I have multiple screens, and so it's picking up a second screen.
Okay.
Okay, let me try something.
Okay.
It was a fun picnic, by the way. Were you there, Katie?
I wasn't. I think I was there the next day.
Okay. It is, let me try this. Does this work?
Yes, there we go.
Okay.
I can see it. And maybe just blow it up a little bit more.
Yeah, I will. Okay.
Yep. Perfect. All right.
Okay.
There we go.
I think that's better.
Yep, better. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Ashley, thank you for submitting yours. Let's just take a quick glance through here. And don't feel like you need to be reading every single line. The intent for this critique is just gut reaction, some things you might notice, some things that you might suggest, again, based on what we've discussed and based on your own experiences. Okay. So let me go back here. Okay, so what I'm looking for is, based on what you saw, your feedback, sort of gut reaction. And actually, if we were in a classroom setting and folks had resumes, I often would have people trade resumes, give you about 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and then you have to turn it over and share with that person. What did you notice? What do you remember about them? So I know it's pretty quick, but tell me a little bit about what you noticed. Yep. So again, some of this I'm going to say is my personal point of view, and you'll hear different opinions from different folks. I definitely agree. I think bullets and not in the paragraph format. Because you have great information on there. It's not at all a criticism of the quality of information you're sharing. It's just in that format, I am afraid that as people are looking through lots of resumes, applications, they're not going to spend the time that they need on it. Yeah, you can have your home address under your names. Again, if you're posting it in a real public spot, then I usually take that home address off just to protect your privacy. Yep, again, my preference is that your education moves to the top of the resume because I want to go, yep, you're qualified, you meet the basic educational requirements. Yeah, and I think you could have a bit more white space. You could change things around, maybe by your headers. So you may not remember this well enough, but at the top, she Ashley had a skills section, and this is where it's challenging. And I'm not, again, doubting at all that you have these skills, but if you have things like conflict resolution, sound decision making, effectively influences others. My preference is for you to demonstrate that in your bulleted descriptions below. Put a place, a context with it, not just generically, I can do it, but I'm going to show you and prove it to you in these descriptions that I list below. So that would be my preference on that. Okay, I'm going to attempt to share something again. We'll see how I do here. So if you were to submit a resume to me, I would send it back with comments like this. Sometimes I'm just asking you questions, I'm giving you prompts, I want to hear from you. Other times I'm giving you specific things. So Ashley, in this case, I think your summary statement up here is good. I might add in number of years that you were in that management experience, had those number of years you've had management experience. I would probably change this to technical skills and really just make it concrete on that area. I talk over here, 4 to 6 bullets. If you've been at a position for a really long time, sometimes 4 to 6 bullets is challenging, in which case I would split that out and do something like have subheaders in there. So you might have a subheader of supervisory experience, 2 to 3 bullets, operational experience, 2 to 3 bullets, coding experience, 2 to 3 bullets.
Mary?
But I think, yep.
We can't see it again. No.
Now I am on the right screen, so I'm not sure.
We just see your folder, like your documents.
Oh, so it switched back to my other screen again? Okay, I might have to figure this out before next time. Sorry, everyone. Hang on. Let me try and move it.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Maybe I need you to stay on, Katie. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, let me start at the top. Here's what it would look like if I sent it to you with the comments. Sometimes I'm actually changing things, like I think this is a better word. Sometimes I'm asking you prompting questions. How do you reduce this in a meaningful way to 4 to 6 bullets can be challenging. I'm often saying, tell me more. How big was this? What was the result of this behavior? And then sometimes I'm trying to help you. If you're to reduce the amount of content, I'm trying to give you my suggestion of how I would do that. So if you can see, and I don't always know, you're going to know better than I do. You're the one who had this job, but I'm going to say, as a reader, these are the things that seem like they're the most important parts. And then I'm saying, when you get to the older positions, maybe just a couple bullets. Maybe this position becomes supporting experience under a whole new header, just like someone else talked about the restaurant experience. I forgot to mention that when you list out College of St. Scholastica, the official title has the word "the" in front of it. I think you probably don't need to say currently taking online, graduating December 2018. You can just list the anticipated graduation date. Okay, I think those are the things I wanted to make sure to highlight. So, okay, well, let me say another thing. So when you're making this decision, what is the process where you go through and decide what to keep and what not to keep? And I would use sort of 2 or 3 questions to yourself. 1, which are the skills most relevant to the job I'm applying for? 2, what are the highest level skills? 3, what are the skills that I haven't described in previous positions? So if you've already talked about um, accuracy and efficiency, maybe even a couple times, you wouldn't need to necessarily state it again. So what are the unique qualifications? Definitely focus on the skills that you use to do those things well. And anytime you've done improvement, things you're proud of, things that your supervisor has commented on, those are the kind of things that I'd like to see on your resume. Okay. So what's interesting is I've lost my chat function altogether now. Not sure why.
If you go down to the bottom of your screen
Yep.
and hover, does it show?
No.
Oh, man.
Are there some other questions? Maybe you can tell me what other things people came up with. See if I'm going to play
Okay,
around.
so Kayla has a question. She says, if we have a resume that has 2 pages, do you really have 3 pages since your references have to be on a separate page?
No, I think the resume is 2 pages of content. The references don't add into that number at all. So even though it's 3 pages of content you're supplying, it's a 2-page resume.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another question. I was a stay-at-home mom for quite a few years. Do I include that on my resume to explain the gap in employment?
I've had that question before. It's a great question. I usually don't include it in your resume. I would include it in your cover letter. So you might say in the cover letter state, you know, after staying at home for 10 years, raising a family. And you might even say where I developed unique skills, including coordination, logistics, and managing a healthy, happy family. I mean, you could say something like that. I was excited to return for additional education and re-enter the workforce. So I would probably do it in a cover letter instead of on the resume.
And then Kayla's asking, should high school be included in education or is that not necessary?
Usually not necessary at this point. Once in a while, if I'm working with a student who's a sophomore or junior and they're like 19 or 20, they're still including some of their high school information. I think generally for most of you, you're probably eliminating high school at this point.
Okay, I have 2 more here.
Okay.
Lynn is asking, should reference lists be held until you are called for an interview?
See, that's a great question. That's what I usually suggest for people. And the reason why is you get to control that list a bit more closely, especially if you're not being public with your current employer that you're looking for a job. So you can, the expectation is when the time is right, they will ask you for references and then you'll supply them. The exception to that is sometimes part of the application is that you have to supply the references at the point of application, in which case you have to follow their rules generally. But other than that, I agree with you. I usually wait on them until they call and say, we're moving the next step of the process. Would you be willing to provide references and names of those references?
Okay. And then Melissa's asking, would you include part-time or PRN positions that are worked simultaneously with a full-time position? If so, how?
Let's see, what is PRN? Part-time.
Like as needed.
Oh, okay, gotcha. That are work simultaneously with full-time. I'll give my opinion, and Katie, I'll be interested in yours too
Okay.
from the profession. I think I think a reason why you would include it was just to show breadth of experiences and maybe you're gaining skills there that you're not getting someplace else. So in that case, I would include it. If you think it muddies up the resume and it doesn't actually add that much more skill set, then I don't think you'd have to have it in there. I don't know, Katie, do you have a different
Well,
opinion?
I was thinking about myself actually, because I was working full time as a HIM manager and then as an IT manager. And during both of those positions, I was adjunct teaching on the side. And then
Okay.
when I applied here to St. Scholastica, obviously I needed to show that adjunct experience. And so
Right.
I listed everything. Um,
Yeah.
and so I kind of wonder if it just depends on the position you're going for and if the skills that you utilized during that part-time or PRN position applied to what you're going for, then I
Yeah.
think it's a good idea. And, you know,
That's good. I just saw someone else, different field, but they
mhm,
were coaching while they were doing their other job. Now they're applying for education positions. Well, yes, that is actually a really nice
yeah,
compliment
yeah.
to the rest of the experiences. Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
it depends, right? Really
Okay.
helpful.
I
Right.
do have another question here from Holly. She says, while I have been attending St. Scholastica, I have not been working because balance school and children with additional needs as a single
Mhm.
mom was a full-time job in itself. How would I explain that gap?
Actually, if when you're a student, there's actually a lot of assumption and more flexibility that you might have had several part-time jobs, you might not have worked at all. So I think that's perfectly acceptable. You could address it in a cover letter. You could say, I've taken the last 3 years to focus on my education and taken that education along with my previous 10 years of work experience. I think I'm a strong candidate for your position, blah, blah, blah. So you could address it there if you want to. But it's not unusual for people to have more spotty work history while they're a student or sometimes take a break from working while they're a student.
And then Kayla is asking about the PPE and if she
Hmm.
should include that on her resume after it's completed.
Yes, right, Katie?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because again, it's a different type of experience, and you'll focus on maybe a special project, the things you were exposed to, what was unique, how has that added a different experience from what you've had in the past. I think um, it just shows more diversity. It shows applying of education to work experience, and that you're also taking that back into the classroom. So yes, it can be under relevant experience. Again, if you take away the word work, then the assumption is it's paid and unpaid, or it can be under your education. I've had people do it both pretty effectively. I don't know, Katie, do you have a preference of where they list it?
um, I think under that the relevant experience.
Yeah.
But for like I'm trying to think of some of these students. I don't know them as well, but I know like our traditional students, the on-campus students, they
Mm-hmm.
have much less work experience than our online students. And
Sure.
so a lot of them will count that as work experience just because they don't have anything else. Um,
Yeah.
so I think it just depends. But I think if for most of the students in our online program, they're already working or have had work experience in the past, and then I would include it as relevant, I
Yeah.
think.
Okay. That makes sense. Now I found my screen looks different now. I will play around with this more, but I found a place in a different format where I can see the chat. So I just saw the
Okay.
next one come in. So learning on the fly,
Okay,
that is okay.
I'll let you address it, Mary, then.
Yeah, so the next one is we're going to receive feedback. Okay, so here's what I'd like to suggest for the next steps. Those of you who submitted already, I will send you the critiques I've already done out right away. For rest of you, what I'd like for you to do is to make updates based on what you've heard today. And on your class website through Blackboard, I'm going to have Katie upload a resume checklist and a cover letter checklist. So we've developed these for students as they're making revisions so that before you submit it to us, you go through this list of 10 or 12 things. Yep, I updated this. Yep, I did that. I think it's helpful for you to keep you on track and moving through it. And then we're making sure we're not giving the same feedback over and over again, that we can get to the deeper level content feedback of how you're writing your descriptions. So yes, we are willing to look at any of your resumes. I also think don't hesitate to reach out to classmates and colleagues for feedback as well. My suggestion is usually that you have a minimum of 3 people look at it, someone from your field, another person, which is often career services, someone else who's in that role to help you, and then someone who is just great at editing, detailed, someone who's going to pick up on all the typos and errors. So some of you might be willing to do this for one another because you do it all the time and will provide great feedback. So if you email it to me, it would be careers@css.edu, and we'll make sure you have this information after class too. But careers with an S at the end @css.edu. That comes to me, and either I'll look at it and provide feedback, or if it gets to be too many, I divide it up among our staff to do that.
Mary, I just want to make a quick comment here.
Yeah.
Just let the students know. So what I'm going to be looking for is after today for y'all to update your resume based on the information Mary presented here, and then and based off the checklists, and just get it to the best state that you can in order to send it out to your PPE mentors. Because I don't know if Mary's going to be able to turn around all these resume reviews by next Sunday when your resume is due. So I say just do your best, and then from there, work with career services to further develop it and get it more refined for when you start your job search. The other thing is if you, depending on the relationship you develop with your PPE mentor, if they're in a hiring position, I think it'd be wonderful to get their perspective, like Mary said, asking somebody in the profession. So if you form that relationship and feel comfortable getting their feedback, I would suggest that you share that with them as well and see what they think.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I don't think I would be able to turn around your whole class by Sunday. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes. And so part of what we also talk about is that your resume, it's a living document. So you update, you use the checklist, get to the best that you can. But really, you can continue to send that to us over the course of the whole semester. We're happy to keep working on it with you and giving you feedback. That's great. And I think that mentor is a great person. You're set up to be asking them questions about your field and your profession. And would you be willing to look at my resume? I've done some updating, but would love your feedback on it. I think that's great. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Okay, I know we're at 5:13. Does this seem like a good breaking point? I know I had other resumes, but you're probably hungry and tired of listening to me, so I'm also...
Well, I think they had some great questions, and so I'm glad we were able to get to all of those too.
Yeah, I think so too. Any last questions before we break? I'm happy to take more. I'm happy to take individual questions to that careers email too. If it's like, Mary, I didn't want to ask this in front of everybody, but I have a question for you, that is perfectly acceptable. The three of you that submitted information to me, so Ashley, Shavonda, Leah, I will scan these in and send them to you to the email that you have listed on here. Probably will be tomorrow morning that I get those out to you. So I'll get those to you right away so you have a place to start. And again, thanks for submitting. Okay,
all right.
Looks like that's it. And thank you for your patience with a little technology. I think I'm only going to use one screen next time. I think that's it. But thank you for your patience as we figure that out too.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'll get this recording posted and the documents Mary referenced. Okay?
All right. Thanks everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.